Good afternoon. My name is Annette Dixon and I'm the Vice President for Human Development here at the World Bank. I'm really happy to be here today with all of you and with such a great set of speakers as we discuss the urgent need to improve learning outcomes in the developing world. Let me tell you why I'm really excited about this, and particularly I think because we are now focusing on a central core issue, not just for human capital development, but for development of the developing world as a whole. As many of you know, we recently launched the Human Capital Project just 6 months ago. And this included a Human Capital Index, which measured the learning and health outcomes of children as they affect not only that child's ability to reach her own full potential, but also to help her country reach its potential. Today, we have over 60 countries that have recognised the need to make faster progress in building their human capital outcomes, and we have some amazing champions for this effort, two of whom are here with us today, the Right Honourable Penny Mordaunt and Henrietta Fore. Now, I think we all appreciate that we have a huge challenge in the developing world in education. There are still over 200 million kids that are excluded from school. They're excluded for multiple reasons, including their gender, their disabilities or abilities. They may live in countries in conflict, and last but not least, poverty keeps them from school. But when they do get to school, we know that 60% of primary school children in the developing countries fail to achieve minimum proficiency in reading, writing, and basic math. We also know today that the skills and competencies and aptitudes that children have or will need to succeed in the world of work, because the world is changing rapidly on them and on us all. Let's take reading, for example. It's one skill that is absolutely foundational, and I think many of us would argue it's a basic human right. But we're far from achieving literacy for all children in the world. Just to give you some examples, today in Mexico, close to 10% of 10-year-olds cannot read at a basic level. In Indonesia, that number is around 50%. And in a country like Niger, one of the poorest countries in the world, it's a staggering 90% of 10-year-olds do not have basic reading performance. There are critical challenges in countries at all levels of development. And this is one of the things we've learned from the Human Capital Index. When it comes to learning outcomes, we see that for most countries, most middle income, lower middle income, and low income countries, they have a significant gap between the years that children are spending in school and the years of learning equivalence that they're achieving. Quite simply, kids not being able to read is not acceptable. It's foundational for all the other things that kids need to do to be able to reach their full potential. For me, this is not just an issue for ministries of education around the world, it's an issue for policymakers in every level of government, in every sector, and for societies as a whole. Yesterday, we had a stunning event here on building human capital in Africa, and we heard from our former dear colleague, Ruth Kagia, a question about why has it taken us so long. We now have the clear evidence that schooling is not the same as learning, and there's an urgent need to explore what we can do to ensure we deliver on the promise of education for all kids and to deliver on the criticality of helping all kids to learn. So let me now turn to Melinda Crane, who will guide us through this afternoon's event with experts, leaders, and thinkers on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette Dixon, and good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am Melinda Crane, Chief Political Correspondent at Deutsche Welle Television, and it is a great pleasure to accompany you here this afternoon as moderator. The title of our flagship event is Learning Matters, Why We Need a Learning Revolution, and you just heard the headline as to why from Annette Dixon, for that very good reason that educational systems are too often focused on schooling rather than on quality learning outcomes. So we want to talk here about how we can really focus attention on delivering and resources on delivering those quality learning outcomes, not least because education is a goal not only in its own right, but also a powerful driver of development and also of sustainable, inclusive growth. So in our two panels, we wish to focus both on the substance and the process of delivering quality learning. And for that reason, we are going to divide our session into two different exchanges. Our first panel will explore why we need a new approach, a learning revolution, looking at current shortcomings in educational outcomes and identifying challenges and needs. And the second will focus on processes and systems, asking how we align the various stakeholders, governments in their entirety, the private sector, development partners, in order to promote a coherent, joined-up approach, because we must have that if we want to achieve this revolution. So I will now ask the first group of panel participants to please join me here on stage. You'll see your name tags here, and if you'll please join me, then I will introduce you. So a warm welcome, and before I provide some introductions, I'll just also say a very warm greeting to our online audience. We do have an event webcast and also a live chat at this address, live.worldbank.org/thelearningrevolution. And I'd also like to say to all of you in this room, as well as those online, if you hear something notable, please do share it with the world. Our Twitter hashtag is Learning Revolution. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers, and in the interest of time, I'm going to be fairly brief and ask you to consult your programs and or the website if you'd like more details. And I will also now proceed in alphabetical order. And I begin with Henrietta Forrest. She is Executive Director of UNICEF. She's a former administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development and has also held leading positions in the private sector. Wonderful to have you with us. Welcome to you. And proceeding alphabetically, I now skip to the right-hand side. I won't say far right, to Julia. To Julia Gillard. She is the board chair of the internationally active NGO Global Partnership for Education. She was formerly Prime Minister of Australia, and in that capacity, she initiated sweeping educational reform. Wonderful that you could be with us today. Penny Mordaunt is the UK Secretary of State for International Development, leading the DFID ministerial team, and she's also Minister for Women and Equalities. Thank you so much for being here. And it's a pleasure to welcome His Excellency Jacob Youssou Zafa. He is Minister of Finance and Economic Development for Sierra Leone, and he began his career in development planning and has extensive experience in training, facilitating, and community mobilization. Excellency, we're very pleased that you can be with us. So I would like to start out with the development partners and ask all of you to talk a little bit about those shortfalls in learning outcomes that Annette mentioned. As we heard, education is attracting more attention and more resources, and yet when it comes to actual learning, we often see disappointing results. So my question to you would be, why is that? What are the obstacles to learning, and what will it take to get that learning revolution going? And I'll just start right here.
Thank you very much. Well, learning happens at a number of stages in life. So in those critical first 1,000 days, there is an enormous amount of learning that is going on. It's when more than 80% of the brain is being developed. And so early childhood development programs will be very important for the future. Sometimes we don't think about that. We think that somehow those were years where they're just growing up and they're not really learning, but they are learning intensive years. Primary school is where we try in our world to teach the basic fundamentals of reading, of writing, and of numbers, of mathematics that Annette mentioned. And we're not doing a very good job as a world. So 6 out of 10 in primary school are not reaching that minimum level of proficiency. Then when we get to secondary school, there are far too many that are dropping out of school, also to the World Bank's numbers. And part of why we need a revolution is that we've got to excite young people, particularly in that secondary school age, to want to come to school, to feel that they are driven to learn something, that they are going to make a livelihood in their future if they go to school. And if we don't make it compelling, if they don't feel that they're delivering and getting and learning some results, some skills, they're not going to come to school. So we, as the world, have to make sure that learning actually takes place, that it's in an environment that is drawing them. So it's going to have to be artificial intelligence, it's going to have to be digital, it's going to have to be teachers, it's going to have to be classrooms, it's going to have to be school fees, it's going to have to be good curriculums. All of this matters.
Thank you very much. And let me just go straight down the panel to you now, Penny Mordaunt.
Thank you. So I think one of the things to remember is that the goalposts are sort of continually being moved because as we really try and make use of the opportunities that are there in economies that are growing, the kind of jobs that are going to be required, the pace that technology is moving at and all of those opportunities, I think we've just got to be, one of the reasons why this becomes doubly difficult is because we're having to change the kind of teaching, the kind of learning that we are doing to make use of those new opportunities. I think that this is really about not just about the numbers of children that are in school, it's about ensuring that every child has a chance. And I really do welcome the work that has been done, particularly over the last 12 months, at the huge push to make sure that the most marginalized children are included, particularly the most marginalized girls and children with disabilities as well, which is incredibly important. And it's vital that we measure that and we track that and we find where those children are. But I also welcome the focus on learning outcomes as opposed to bums on seats in schools. I think that is absolutely critical. And I think there are 3 areas where we have the biggest challenge. The first is to ensure that nations are really building the capacity that they need to collect more revenue and to really understand how they can spend that in the most effective way. Secondly, I think it's about the workforce. We know we have a massive shortfall in teachers worldwide. We're currently just shy of 70 million teachers short worldwide, an enormous number to make up, but also the quality of those teachers is absolutely vital. So we've got to make sure that we're recruiting, but we're equipping and really enabling teachers to do the best job that they can. And I think also it's about, for organizations like DFID, it's about really targeting the funds that we have at the most vulnerable groups, really ensuring that we're doing the things that no one else can do. And I think the Human Capital Index that the bank has developed is a critical tool in that. And I think we have to continue to develop that, disaggregate the data so that we really are understanding that we're reaching the right people. And I'm delighted that the Inclusive Education Facility has been launched this week. This is a partnership between us and Norway and the World Bank to make sure particularly that children with disabilities are in school and critically learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll just skip over now to Julia Gillard. We're doing the development partners first, and then we will come to you, Minister. So same question to you, please. Why we see these shortfalls, and also what we need to get a revolution going.
Sure. Well, I'd endorse what's been said so far on early childhood and Penny's remarks. I mean, I think we should just start by acknowledging we are now having the right conversation, the conversation about learning outcomes, and we are getting better at collecting the data around learning outcomes. Now, that might sound like two humble things to say, but if we went back 5 years or so, then we wouldn't have been having this conversation and it wouldn't have been informed by data. And I think we are increasingly now turning our eyes to the efficiency of the spend for the dollars invested. What are the learning outcomes generated? At the Global Partnership for Education, as the multilateral fund focused on school education in developing countries, I'd just say two things. One, we need to get better and better at sharing what works, and we're not as good at that as we should be. We're trying to make a contribution to that through a knowledge and innovation exchange. So many other education partners and collaborators are doing that, trying to share best practice better, but we would be turning a blind eye to things we can really learn from unless we acknowledge that currently there are places, schools, regions, provinces, countries getting it right, and that should be shared. And then secondly, I think the workforce challenge and how we conceptualise the teaching workforce for the future is a very big key to quality improvement. It's one of the big demands of developing country partners in the Global Partnership for Education, a focus on teacher preparedness, teacher quality, but we need to double down, triple down, quadruple down on that given the dimensions of the challenge.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll pick up a bit later on some of those points. But let me come now to you, Minister Safa. And I know that Sierra Leone's educational system was devastated by the long civil war, and that it has really taken your country quite some time to try to bring education back up. So perhaps you can tell us what you're doing, what kind of challenges you face, and also how you're addressing some of the other challenges that the development partners who've just spoken have raised, meaning everything from the qualifications of teachers to getting children to school, inclusion, and so on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, as a matter of fact, even before the war, the education system has started deteriorating. So the war only worsened the situation to the extent that only 2 out of every 5 child adults has been to school. The literacy rate is basically about 40%. It's as worse as that level. Against that background, the current government canvassed on free quality school education, which we started in September last year. To show commitment for that, we've allocated 21% of the budget to education. And the free quality school education is currently targeting 10,747 school children, to 2.14 million school children in over 10,000 schools. And the focus on it is access. Because the first aspect, let them have the access first. I mean, they couldn't go to school because they couldn't pay the tuition fees required. So government has eliminated tuition fees. Now we pay for every child from preschool to senior secondary school from the budget. Then public examinations, the primary school examinations, the junior secondary school, the middle school and the high school education, public examination fees are paid. Students used to drop because the parents cannot afford or couldn't afford those examination fees. To also increase access, we also factor in the disability issues. We provided in the budget resources for making the school environment friendly for persons living with disabilities. Then we are, at the same time, whilst we are addressing access, we are also addressing quality. Particular intervention in the area of qualities, additional classrooms, so that we can reduce the number of people per classrooms to improve learning itself. Then we provided textbooks, free textbooks for 4 core subject areas: science, social studies, English and mathematics. Then we've recruited additional teachers paid from the budget itself. We strengthened the Teacher Service Commission, and we're also doing quite a lot for retention and post-completion. But now, in terms of the critical challenges we're facing, one, as you increase the supply of education services, the demand increases. So, when we introduced the free quality school education program in September, enrollment automatically went up, which means there's an increased demand for additional classrooms. Now, subsequently, additional the demand for textbooks and other educational services. That is one. Also, the number of teachers. Though we have recruited more teachers, what we've learned, the qualified teacher ratio is still high up there. You have less qualified teachers, and most of them are in urban areas. They don't want to go into the rural areas. So we are faced with that. We are also faced with the issue of the capacity of the ministry itself for school supervision. Now we're putting in place, they've started the recruitment of additional school supervision that will ensure school attendance by teachers, make sure that teachers themselves are, they finish the curriculum or finish the syllabus as it were. Then a very critical problem is teenage pregnancy. Teenage pregnancy is where Leone ranks in the first 10 countries of high teenage pregnancy. To the extent that it's affecting even maternal mortality. 40% of maternal deaths as a result of teenage pregnancy. And the cause of teenage pregnancy like the early marriage. And that is creating a problem for completion of a girl child. Mm-hmm. So for us as a government, our major to ensure school completion by the girl child, we need to invest in teenage pregnancy alongside the free quality school education. So the critical challenges also include the coordination mechanisms. But we've set up a governance structure to work on that. We have a high-level interministerial level with partners, where we meet with all the partners, DFID, and I must, at this forum, thank the DFID very much for their support. They've been very supportive of the program. Of course, the World Bank is coming on with 70 million new money for the free quality school education, thanks to the Vice President of Human Development. They've been very keen to push that behind the scene. The DFID is putting money, about 70.5, the GP grants is given to UNICEF. They are also supporting the school, through UNICEF, they are providing textbooks. The WFP is also another partner that is supporting the school feeding program. Partners are there, will all meet at the forum to discuss the strategic directions. The technical level, they are also there. They meet in the Ministry of Education. The high-level partnership meeting, the government partnership forum is housed in the State House. The Ministry of Finance is very much central in that. So the good thing is that the Ministry of Finance does not need to be sensitized on the need for it. Luckily for me, I was part of the design of the manifesto for the elections last year. Then I happened to be put in a position where I'm allocating resources. So I would make a manifesto commitment for 20% of the budget to be allocated. That was immediately effected 3 months when they did a supplementary budget. And we have sustained that. And I promise we're going to sustain it. It's quite challenging, it's quite interesting, but I tell you, it's doable. And that's the best way to invest resources.
Thank you very much. And let me stay with the question of resources and go to Julia Gillard. And to what extent is improving learning outcomes mostly just a matter of investing more money? Would we automatically see an improvement? Interestingly enough, the minister described a kind of a virtuous cycle there where beginning to transform the educational system and improving the supply side then generates ever more demand, so clearly escalating need for resources. How can countries work to really leverage the kind of financial support they're going to need?
We need more and better financing. it's not a question clearly of just more money equals better outcomes. If life was as simple as that, then we would have solved a lot of the big challenges already. It's not as simple as that. But the truth is, if every dollar currently invested in education by domestic resource mobilisation and by external financing flows, if every dollar was mobilised perfectly with absolute efficiency for impact, you would still not be educating every child at the quality level that we want, particularly for the jobs of the future, and you would not be educating the most marginalised children who almost by definition are the ones who are harder and often more costly to ensure get a good quality education. So yes, we've got to keep our eyes on maximising impact from every dollar, but we can't down tools on the advocacy for more dollars for education. In doing that, key recognition has to be that overwhelmingly the money that supports education systems comes from developing countries themselves. And in acknowledging that, often when we have these discussions we end up talking about the external financing flows, but we can't not acknowledge that first. But the external financing flows are important, and we always have a job of work to do to make sure that they land in a coordinated way. There is too much fragmentation in the way that money lands now, and we need to make that a key change agenda for all of us who are working so that we better work together, particularly as we're seeking to upscale. If we're advocating for more money for education, more instruments for change in education, which is what we're doing now, then we've also got to be advocating for more coordination if that's going to make the big differences, the step change, the revolution that we want to see.
May I just ask you, because the Minister talked about the need to ensure that funding is sustainable. So in terms of GPE's experience, where do you see interesting best practices amongst countries in terms of leveraging domestic resources and keeping them coming?
When we look across our GPE countries, many countries have been on a steady upwards progression in terms of their expenditure on education, and a requirement under the GPE model to qualify for one of our major grants is that countries do need to be increasing their domestic education expenditure. Having said that, I think we do need to recognise many of the places in which we're working have relatively small real economies, thin taxation revenues. So even when you are talking about achieving a benchmark like 20% of government expenditure on education, that's still 20% of relatively small amounts of money given the size of the task. Now that agenda about taxation revenue lies beyond the immediate education advocates. I mean, we're not a taxation body, we're not a revenue growth body, but I think that has to be part of the picture that we're discussing if we are talking about a sector where domestic resource mobilisation is so critical.
Thank you very much. Let me come now to Henrietta Fore and UNICEF. And if you like to say something about financing, by all means do, because I know you have a great deal of experience in leveraging investment. But beyond that, I would also like to talk a little bit about teenagers, because I know they are one important focus of UNICEF's work. And I wonder, how do we address barriers to learning and skills development for them? Because many of their needs are unique. And what proves effective in practice?
Good, thank you. So let me build on Julia and Penny's comments on the financing. Funding does make a difference, and it particularly makes a difference if you are a minority community, or if you're in the world of disabilities or differently abled children. So actually just more money would help. I mean, if 9 out of 10 children with disabilities are not in school, we could probably reach them with more money. And if you are in a minority community, an Indigenous population, it's getting the money. That makes a difference. It's difficult sometimes for governments, and the Minister has been very articulate on this, to reach everyone in their country. So those who are the furthest left behind, they're the ones that we need the financing for. And what the World Bank has offered to all of us is public and private financing, that they could help mobilize it. And with the new direction of the bank in human capital, this is a game changer. And all of us should take advantage of it, every country, every entity that can, to try to move education. Young people. So adolescents are a very quizzical time of life. And sometimes they don't feel that they're really talking to us, and sometimes they don't feel that we're listening to them. But what they say to us is that there's too much violence in their life, and the violence is at home, it's in schools, it's on the way to school and home from school, it's in the communities, and it's online. And they would like help with this, and they want help with everything from mental health to what are they going to do with their lives. So a lot of us have jobs, and most of them are not seeing a life in which they're going to have a job in an office the way we've known it. So we're seeing in our statistics that 8 out of 10 are going to have to be entrepreneurs. But when do you learn to be an entrepreneur? For many of them, they're not going to be going to college, so they've got to make a livelihood earlier. So in secondary school, we have to try to give them these skills. So we have to make sure that they have fundamental, basic knowledge of reading, writing, and numeracy. They have to have transferable skills like how to communicate and how to be an entrepreneur. They have to have some occupational skills, like how to be a carpenter or a motorcycle repair person, or how to be an engineer or a nurse or a teacher. And they're going to have digital skills. And for some of these, they're going to have a language. English is useful for digital skills, but often if you are just learning in your own home language, it makes it very difficult to become a part of the world. And young people now are so connected digitally. They are seeing the world, they're seeing our world, they want to be part of it, and they want this learning revolution, and they're going to help us design it. We've launched Generation Unlimited. Everyone here is a part of it, but it's a big public-private platform because we think some of the solutions are going to come from the private sector. They're going to help us, and we're going to have to teach the teachers at the same time with the students. So there'll be lots of digital skills, and artificial learning will be here within the decade. And so as this all begins to move along, we've got to help the teachers and the students learn at the same time.
Thank you very much. And let me stay with that same topic because it is, of course, of burning importance to so many countries, and ask you, Penny Mordaunt, what you see is absolutely critical to prepare young people for a work future that is hard to imagine now.
Yes, well, I agree absolutely with what Henrietta has said at the start, which is that, you know, this isn't a sort of sausage factory that we just put in a certain amount of resource and have some good policies in place. It's about an individual's motivation, what makes them want to learn, their ambitions, what they personally are good at, what they want to go on and do. And I think that to really ensure that that's happening, people have to see that it is worth them staying in school, it's worth them engaging. They need to know that there is going to be opportunities there, whether it's the opportunity to grow a business themselves or that there is economic activity there where they can go in and they've got a trajectory into work. So that is really important, and as well as the issues and that Henrietta mentioned, ensuring that people can have a safe learning environment, that they can focus on their studies, they're not worrying about other things. I think also, I think there is a huge need for us to really focus and do more looking at technical education. Quite often there's a lot of great scholarship schemes, there's a lot of pathways for people to go into university, but I think there is a bigger market out there for developing better technical education, just as we have in the UK and elsewhere, really looking at giving people that those very practical skills, usually from mid-teens onwards. And the private sector can play a huge role in that. And I'm very interested in how we enable businesses that might be looking to invest in nations, might be looking to set up, whether they're service jobs or whether they're manufacturing or other jobs, to really learn from companies that are already doing this about how you can do this really well, because it's not about just lifting what you may have done somewhere and plonking it down in another country. And I've been very impressed with the tremendous experience that some companies have built up with really doing this and catering for enormous numbers of people learning technical skills, but also what motivates people to then go on and pursue a career in particular sectors. So I think as much as we can connect up business people around the world who have this experience with those that want to really start developing in particular nations and want to do likewise. And then I think it's also about just ensuring that where we know those individual children and students who are facing particular barriers and multiple barriers to getting on, that we're really also catering for those individuals as well. And I mentioned in particular DFID's focused on very marginalised girls, but also people with disabilities as well, who we know are actually the most entrepreneurial group in any society. So if we're not including them, then that nation is going to be missing out.
Thank you very much. Minister, let me come to you now to also ask you about your country's priorities in terms of preparing young people for a future in which work is going to look very, very different from how it looks today. Is that something Sierra Leone is prioritizing? And if so, what is your vision?
Yes. Well, generally, I mean, the flagship agenda for the government is human capital development. Education ranks top of it all. But within the education, there are two areas. The free quality school education, but also the skills development, technical and vocational training. That is even the reason why the government separated the Ministry of Education. Or, it used to be only one Ministry of Education covered up to university. Now we have Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education separate from that of Ministry of Technical and Vocational Education. We realized that most of the early school leavers, they didn't have an opportunity. They were not given a second chance to make it in life. And they didn't have the incentive, or how would I say, they were not encouraged to go for technical education for several reasons. First, the policy itself is not clear. Two, the certification process we are not clear. The standards were not clear. So it has likely been the domain of the private sector, with minimal support from government. We're changing the landscape. I think the public has to invest. That is one area where the public-private partnership model is working now. We're looking at the PPP model to develop technical vocational education systems. We started with the policy, the certification, the curriculum, and everything, and even leading to enterprise development upon graduations. Because particularly for the early school leavers, I mean the teenage girls who drop out of school, you have to give them a second opportunity. They can do better in life, but they need to be given the wherewithal to start small businesses when they complete these courses. Because in the past, they go and spend 2 to 3 years in technical vocational schools. They come out, they have nowhere to go. What do they end up doing? They go to commercial sex. So what we are doing, we train them. They will provide packages for them to be able to establish their own enterprises and become self-reliant. That is the focus. And that's one area where we need huge capital investment, because we have to build the infrastructure, we have to equip the areas, because I must admit, the past 3-4 decades, we've never treated it seriously. I mean, I'm not too sure, because there are different theories to it. One of the theories said it was a colonial legacy from the British, but I said, no, that's not like that. British is not like that, so why can't it be like that for us? Maybe we exaggerated it. We focus on the grammar school type of education. Everybody wanted to become a lawyer, a doctor, or something somewhere. To the extent we have to import crane operators in large mining companies from neighboring countries. We have to import expertise to work in mining companies for basic skills. that they can take 1 year to do in Sierra Leone. We are working now with the mining companies to provide training for people to build capacity for skills they demand. We've done a skills audit, for all the for critical sectors. So a lot of work has been done. With the support of the GIZ particularly. The GIZ, sure, we are very mindful about that. We need it, and that's the second focus of our education agenda.
Thank you very much. We have to wind up in just a moment, but we have 2 questions from the online audience. So I'm just going to read them out, and whoever would like to say a brief word, I welcome you to give me a sign. The first one is essentially about inclusiveness, and several of you have mentioned the great importance of learners with special needs and bringing them into the system. This question asks, how do we ensure that no child is left behind and make education accessible to learners with special needs? So who has a thought? Please.
Well, so we just have been working on an education program that's digital on a tablet in Kenya. And what it means is that if you are either sight impaired or hearing impaired, that you can learn at the same time with someone who is differently abled. And what it means is that you are truly included. It means that you have friends that are sighted, friends with hearing, and that you can learn at the same time. And so it's everything from the alphabet to there were some games. And it's fun. It's what real inclusivity means, which is that you're all treated equally. You're just differently abled.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Anyone want to add?
Yeah. What I would say, yes, every child has a right to education. But we must start with the policy framework. The current policies themselves must make explicit provision for persons living with disabilities, for example. We must increase access of the persons living with disability in the classrooms, because most schools are not disabled friendly. That's unacceptable. Then the education material themselves cannot be read by most persons living with disability. So, for the those with high impairment, something has to be done for them to be able to read the textbooks. That's quite huge, because in our own country, the spread of persons living with disability also makes it very challenging. You have high concentration in urban towns and few concentrations in rural areas, because they cannot survive in the rural areas where there's poverty. They have to come to the urban towns and beg their living. So it's quite challenging, but it's necessary, and it's part of our agenda as well.
Thank you. Julia Gillard, if you want to say a word on that as well, you're welcome. But I have one other very quick audience question, and it is this. It essentially gets back to what you said about it's not only a question of throwing more money. This person asks, what can be done to reduce cost and at the same time improve quality? In other words, how do you get that greater efficiency that you talked about earlier?
To take one example of greater efficiency, there's the question of school repetition of kids staying in school grades because they aren't achieving the learning outcomes, meaning that there's more and more effort put into their education but without an outcome. If you can deal with that question by ensuring that every child's got a learning plan and they're acquitting their learning goals, then you would have a more efficient journey for them as an individual through education and a more efficient expenditure on their education. I just wanted to say very quickly on the children with disabilities, in some of our work, for example, in Cambodia, we know that this ends up joining back to teacher quality, because it's often teachers who pick up that students in the class have even very remediable disabilities like eyesight. And so, they realise there's something wrong, then you can get the diagnosis, then it can be fixed with glasses, but that child is going to end up always endlessly behind in learning outcomes unless that's identified.
Thank you very much. Penny Mordaunt, please.
I just want to emphasize the point that when we're looking at what's the return on the investment that we're making, that if we get this right for the most vulnerable in society, you will see enormous returns on investment. I'll just tell this one story from a recent visit to Cox's Bazar, and DFID are funding some education programs and activities there for children with very complex needs. And just one story, there was a teenager there who in 6 months since this program had been running, was the first time that they had been able to indicate to somebody that they needed to use the bathroom. So, and just that small step, the difference that that made to their ability to then participate in other things, the difference that it made to their family and what they were able to do was just enormous. And I think that's just an important factor when we're talking about in investment and the return on that we remember actually this is probably the best investment that any nation can make.
Thank you very much. A very moving illustration. Henrietta, before you wanted to say one more sentence?
Yes, I'll just add in that early childhood development should be part of every country's education program. It's very inexpensive because most countries already have kindergartens, but if they can do preschool education, it makes an enormous difference, like 25 to 50 cents per child. I mean, this is just an excellent investment.
Thank you very much. Many thanks to all of you for this very interesting exchange. Let's give them a warm round of applause. I will ask you to return to your seats because we do have a special feature now, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. If we are serious about sparking a learning revolution, it's obviously crucial to speak not only about young people, but also with young people, to hear their own perspectives on better ways to learn for a truly vibrant future. And to that purpose, the World Bank and the Financial Times hosted a blog writing competition for high school students. And we will now take just a moment to hear the messages of some of the finalists in that competition. Could we start the film, please?
For centuries, our teaching methods have remained largely the same.
Education is about expanding minds, encouraging creativity, solving problems, and contributing as individuals, team members, and leaders.
Equipped with the ability to understand the news and the economy, an open-minded, environmentally responsible generation could truly change the world.
In the future, we need kids to be able to think critically.
How is one person supposed to cater to the different learning needs of all the different students?
Students' skills must be teased out, developed, and tailored to.
Rather than adversaries, I see tradition and innovation as allies in education.
Imagine bouncing back and forth between the real world and the virtual world, filled with an insatiable zeal for knowledge that is new, egalitarian, and individually curated.
Our aim should be forming people who are creative, reflective, and adaptable.
Ladies and gentlemen, two of the young winners we just saw in that film are with us here today. So I will ask 17-year-old Nia Doan from Vietnam and 16-year-old Ishita Gupta from India to please join me on stage. And I will also ask Annette, who is already in place, to please recognize their achievement. So please, girls, come to the stage. Congratulations to the two of you. I think I can speak for everyone here in saying we wish you the very best of luck, and we are sure you will have vibrant futures. Congratulations. You may take your seats. And Annette, you may stay right here. So we will now move straight into our next panel, ladies and gentlemen, and I will just read off the names of our additional panel participants and ask them to please then join me on stage. Mary Kamel Kawar is Jordan's Minister of Planning and International Development, and she has over 25 years of experience in development work at the global, at the country, and at the regional level. Welcome to you, Excellency. That'll be your place right there. And it's a pleasure to welcome Alan Blue. He is co-founder of the professional network LinkedIn, and he is also its vice president for product management. He is a theater designer by training, apropos changes in the future of work, and he previously designed new products for PayPal. Please join us on stage. Welcome to you. And Annette Dixon, whom we've already heard from, I will just also briefly introduce in a bit more detail. She has had a long career at the World Bank, and prior to that, she worked for the government of New Zealand as chief executive in the Ministry of Youth Affairs and also in the Ministries of Health and Women's Affairs. So great that you can be with us on this panel as well. And our focus in this panel, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be really about how we get a coordinated, joined-up approach in this learning revolution, because that is clearly going to be key to improving educational outcomes in all the ways that we've been talking about. So let me start with you, Excellency, Minister Kawar, and with reference to a particular challenge that your country faces, you have an enormous number of refugees in your country. And I wonder, particularly in terms of bringing them into the educational system, what are you doing to ensure a coordinated approach?
Thank you very much. As everybody knows, Jordan has hosted a very large number of refugees. Now, the education system accepts any person, no matter, any child, no matter what the nationality is. So Syrian children were welcome to attend Jordanian schools, and not just Syrian children, any refugee in Jordan. And it is from the principle of not leaving anyone behind. However, we had two challenges, because suddenly we had an influx of new students in schools. And there were two main challenges. Teachers could not absorb the added volume of work. That's on the school side. But also Syrian children, the young children had a hard time attending and staying in schools, and the older Syrian children, after interruption, were not very eager to go back to school, so you had a very large dropout. So what did we do? To ensure that younger Syrian kids attend school, we trained Syrian teachers from inside the camps as teacher assistants inside public Jordanian schools. So they weren't officially Jordanian government teachers, but they were teachers in their country. So it was good to have inclusion and to have Syrian teachers alongside Jordanian teachers. And the second, for the older kids, and as in the previous panel, we were talking about learning. We weren't just talking about education. And one of the partnerships was a lot of NGOs. So one program, it's called IDRAK, and it is a Queen Rania Foundation project that had online learning through technology. So older children could learn, could get certificates, and could get higher education. So that is our approach. And today we have 134,000 Syrian children in schools. And one problem is that we have 204 schools with double shifts because of the very large volumes. And this we are addressing also with partnerships with NGOs and the international communities in building more schools and reducing the number of double shifts.
Let me stay with that point and come to you, Annette Dixon, and ask about how we really get that alignment that we talk about so often between all of the different actors involved in working on educational systems and outcomes. And how can we align these stakeholders around a single objective, namely of the one that you spoke of, improving learning outcomes so we truly make more rapid progress?
Well, I think, coordination is a challenge for any country. And I think, one of the things we're really saying in the Human Capital Project is you don't get good learning outcomes just through ministries of education. It's, it really does take a village. And in that sense, it starts with families wanting good quality education for their kids. And a lot of the conditions that actually help families to do that actually require other interventions from outside of the education system. It may be, access to safe transport for kids to get to school. It may be social safety nets for the poorest and most vulnerable. So that's one thing. So the coordination across government is really a big challenge. And then secondly, in federalized countries, or in most countries, it's also coordination across the different levels between federal government, state governments, provinces, districts. So one thing we're saying is it starts with everybody understanding how well is the education system actually supporting learning. And I've been really surprised in the Human Capital Project, actually, how many policymakers who are not directly engaged think that because kids are in school, they're learning. And so data on learning outcomes actually, and here, we really need to support countries to develop good assessment systems so everybody's aligned around a common understanding of how well learning is actually happening. And that's one of the things at the bank that we're focusing on, because unless people are all on the same page about that challenge, they're flying blind, basically, in some cases.
Thank you very much. I thought what we heard from Minister Safo about the link between keeping girls in school and sexual and reproductive rights was very, very interesting in terms of exactly those linkages that you are talking about. Let me come to you now, Alan Blue, and we've heard a lot about the future of work from different participants in our first panel. In a recent interview, you acknowledged that it's nearly impossible to predict the future of work. So I wonder, how then can we prepare young people for the jobs of tomorrow if it's so hard to know what those jobs are going to look like?
It's a great question, and I do actually believe that there are some things we know about the future of work. So one we know is that things will continue to change, and they will continue to change more and more rapidly. So we should all expect to change jobs frequently, to even change roles frequently. The second thing is we know that most of the jobs of the future will be done in partnership with technology. So no matter what you do right now, if you're not using a computer to do it, you will use a computer to do it. Might be a robot, might be a point of sale device, whatever it is, it's going to be part of your future if it isn't right now. So two clear takeaways we can take from that. The first is that we need to be able to train people to be flexible in terms of the things they will do in the future. And this comes back to the point that was made on the first panel about soft skills and how important it was to learn how to learn how to work with other people, to learn how to make good decisions, because those are going to be fundamental to any kind of work you do. The second thing is that technical education is no longer a nice to have. If every job is going to become a technology job, every person needs to know how to use technology. So in addition to reading, writing, numeracy, we also all need to be able to use a computer. We need to know how data is used in the work that we do. Otherwise, we simply won't be prepared either for the world of work or even to be good citizens.
Thank you very much. Say a few words, if you would, please, about what private sector tech companies like your own can contribute, because I know that you are launching a learning initiative with the World Bank, so maybe you can say a word about that and then also about the role of the private sector generally.
The kind of reality, I think, of where we are and where we think we will see ourselves in the future is that those two, today and 10 years from now, face exactly the same set of challenges. In other words, right now, one of the hardest things to do is to make sure you are training people so that they can take the jobs of today. That's true today. That will also be true in 10 years. So our goal should be to build a system which allows us to understand what is happening in the economy around us so that our education system can change and flex in order to make sure that people are learning the things they need to be learning. And this is where data comes in, and where being able to observe what's actually happening in the economy is most important. So for the last few years, the LinkedIn team has been working with the World Bank to develop a new data portal, which you can find yourself if you'd like to go check it out and play with the data. It's at linkedindata.worldbank.org. And you can see information about skill needs. You can see information about jobs, job growth, migration between places, in order to help educators and governments, NGOs, and even individuals make better choices about the kinds of things they need to learn, to teach, and to support.
Thank you very much. So, two different aspects of evidence-based policymaking and the importance of data for that. Minister, let me come back to you to talk a little bit about your work in partnership with the private sector. To what extent is the private sector an important partner for you in trying to address some of the challenges that you face and also get better outcomes?
Exactly. We are finding ourselves at a time where we have to think of partnerships, that government cannot do things alone anymore. So I'll provide you with a few challenges that we have and how we are addressing them in partnership with the private sector. One, in the next 10 years, if you can imagine, we have to build 600 new schools. That is because of population growth. You know, we are a very youthful population. 70% of Jordanians are below the age of 30. But also a lot of schools are rented and are not compliant. So rather than thinking, okay, how are we going to go about this huge infrastructural project and where can we fund it from, we have partnered recently as a case study. We are piloting a project with the IFC, where they will be building, managing, and operating public schools. And if this project works, then that is a way for the future where we can manage the curriculum in partnership with the private sector, because you need to align it to the future skills and needs of jobs, but also we don't have to worry about the cost of infrastructure. Another a challenge is that in Jordan today, only 14% of children below the age of 4 have early childhood education. And if you can just imagine the lost opportunity in terms of early childhood development. And as a government, we really want to promote this within the public sector, public education, but also private education. Today, we don't have the means. So for this, we are partnering with the World Bank in thinking of different options to develop early childhood development with the private sector. For example, can we provide lower income families with vouchers? Can we regulate the sector in a way where you can establish a large number of very compliant, high-quality childhood development that are not managed by the government? So these are the things we are really thinking of. The last one relates to what my colleague just said, is how can we best do the transition from school to work? And for this, we are aligning the vocational education systems, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Education with the private sector. And there are things we are calling sector skills councils, where the private sector, the employer, is actually managing and leading on the skills and certification with the public sector in the background.
Thank you very much. Annette, you talked in your earlier answer about the need for very clear goals. What else would you say is absolutely key for governments that really want to effect this kind of transformation that we're talking about and do it in an affordable and effective way?
We think that there are 4 things that policymakers need to keep a really strong focus on. The first is prepared learners. It starts with learners. And that, is all the things we know about, that children have good nutrition, are safe from violence, and have stimulation. in the early years. All that stuff that we know well, it starts with that. Secondly, it's all about teachers. Teachers remain and are the core of any good education system, and that won't change. In fact, actually, I think the role of teachers is only going to get more central, because teachers increasingly need to be teaching the things that machines can't teach, to borrow from Jack Ma. And I think this is important. And actually, there's nothing soft or easy about teaching soft skills. This is really hard stuff. And we know that these social and emotional skills are going to be even more critical for people in the future of work. The things like competencies like grit and tenacity and persistence and teamwork and problem solving, critical thinking. This is the kind of stuff that every kid needs to leave school with, as well as, of course, all the other technical education outcomes like reading, writing, math, and so on. The third is, yes, there's a role for technology to support this process, and it's everything from curriculum to resources, and there's a lot of development in this space. And I think for developing countries, it's really important to focus on those things that are going to support teachers to do their job better, because many countries have teachers that, frankly, are challenged because they are themselves coming out of education systems that are quite frail. And I think the technologies that will most help are those that have been tested at scale in low capacity situations, across a variety of contexts. And then last but not least, there's a really important role for leadership, and leadership at the school level and for the whole education system. Yesterday I was driving to work early, and I listen to podcasts from Radio New Zealand when I come to work. So I kind of keep up with the same day's news. And there was a researcher talking about a long-term study that's just been completed in New Zealand, where they followed 5 years, they followed a whole bunch of schools, and they did an in-depth study in the 20 schools that had had the biggest improvement in learning outcomes. And they found that there were 3 things in common. Firstly, the kids were in a safe and inclusive learning environment. Kids learn when they feel safe and when they're included and welcomed, and it's accessible for all kids. Secondly, there was strong relationships between learners, their teachers, their parents, their communities, the society, and the private sector. The relationships between the school and the rest of the world are absolutely critical. And last but not least, there was really good leadership. And we all know, we travel around the world and we see variation in the quality of schools. You can walk into a school and you can feel its difference. And it will often come back to the quality of the leader.
Right. Thank you very much. 2 questions for you, Alan Blue. One, those skills that Annette listed off, those are pretty much exactly, that's the laundry list of skills that you hear will be in the jobs that don't go to machines. So creativity, critical thinking, and so on. And they were, interestingly enough, skills that some of the young people in the film also mentioned. So I wonder if you would agree that that's a list that we need to be concentrating on to prepare for that future. And secondly, ed tech. We often hear the future belongs to ed tech. It's going to be very, very crucial. Where do you see ed tech going? What do you think are promising innovations in that space? What would get you excited?
Sure. So I think I couldn't agree more about the soft skills. So we call them soft skills, and it's a strangely belittling term for something which is so essential to the way we do work. When we look at the data about the greatest skill gaps that exist around the world, more and more often the skill gaps we see are in soft skills, in things like oral communication and things like analytical thinking. They really are essential to make people successful, kind of whatever job they actually do. And yes, it's something we have to figure out a way to actually concentrate on. It's also one of those things which people begin to develop skills for very early in their lives. And this is actually one of the challenges of making this work, is that when you're talking about high school or college, those can be strongly influenced by groups of employers who are saying, well, this is what we need, and we can be very precise about the technical requirements. But those employers have less interest and less ability to affect what people are learning in kindergarten or learning in K through 6 timeframe, when many of these skills are beginning to be developed. So there's a real challenge there of how to bridge that gap. Educational technology might be able to do some of it. I said earlier that I think that if you're not doing your job with a computer now, you will be doing your job with a computer in the future. And I think that goes for teaching as well. I think that teaching is, we are going to discover ways in which teachers and technology are going to be able to work together to produce not only better results, but better scaled results. So we'll give you an example from a work that LinkedIn has done in India. There's an organization there called IL and FS, and they do large-scale infrastructure and development projects in India. And in order to make sure there were people to work at the hotels that they were building and the hospitals they were building, they also began to train people local to those new construction projects how to do those jobs. LinkedIn, we went and made a partnership with them. That partnership basically takes the training that is being done by IL and FS and makes it part of LinkedIn Learning, which is our learning product. So what we have is a combination of classroom training and then constant access to the training materials online, which can be used in the workplace or in off hours. It's a combination of technology and teaching. So for me, the places where I am most excited about education technology are the places where teachers and technology where we're experimenting with the balance between those two things. Because I think there's a huge amount of leverage to be gained by basically making each teacher more impactful with some help from tech.
Thank you very much. We have just a little bit of time left, and I'd like to come back, Minister, if you don't mind, to a point that Annette made and also that we heard earlier from Henrietta Fore in regard to children's wish for safe environments. And clearly, again, for your Syrian refugee children, they have undoubtedly seen traumatic things. And I wonder, how do you try to provide that safe environment for not only them, but especially for them?
I think, as I said, the combining Syrian teacher assistant with Jordanian teacher's assistants provides some feeling of safety for children. But there are a lot of civil society initiatives. There is one organization that is about community learning and bridging the space between the community, the parents, and inside the classroom. And it started in a Palestinian refugee camp. It's called Ana Ata'allam, I Learn, but now it is all over the country, and it just shows the great appetite for these linkages between teacher, community, household, and school space.
Another form of alignment, absolutely crucial. Thank you very much to all of you. I really appreciate this very thoughtful and reflective exchange. Let's give them a warm round of applause. And may I also say thank you very much for joining us, to our live audience here in the room, and also to our online audience, whom I presume are still with us. And many thanks as well to the bank for making these discussions possible and for getting us on the road to a learning revolution. And thanks as well to all who have helped to organize this very, very interesting discussion. So warm thanks to our host.